The first thing everyone noticed was her voice. It didn't shake. It didn't crack. It cut clean through the noise of the crowd like a blade. "Let them watch, I'm not afraid." A hush fell over the dusty town square, the kind of silence that feels heavier than shouting. Dozens of eyes turned toward her, curious, judgmental, some openly cruel. And standing at the edge of it all, half hidden behind a weathered fence, was the lonely rancher who had spent most of his life making sure no one ever looked his way until now. His name was Elias Cole, and for as long as anyone could remember, he had lived on the far edge of town, where the land grew rough and people stopped asking questions. He was the man who fixed his own fences, buried his own dead dogs, and ate most of his meals alone. Folks said he preferred it that way, but the truth was simpler and sadder. Life had taught him not to expect anyone to stay. Elias had once been different. Years ago, before grief hollowed him out, he'd been known as a man with a warm laugh and steady hands. Then came the fire that took his parents, the drought that killed half his cattle, and the betrayal that drove his wife away with promises she never meant to keep. By the time the dust settled, Elias had learned how to survive by shrinking, by staying quiet, visible, and unimportant. So when she arrived in town, he noticed her the way a starving man notices bread. Her name was Clara Wynne. She came with little more than a single trunk, a worn coat, and a past she never explained. What she did have was presence. Not loud or boastful, but unyielding. She met people's eyes when they spoke. She worked harder than anyone expected. And when whispers followed her down the street, she walked straight through them as if they were nothing but wind. The town didn't know what to make of her. And when people don't understand something, they try to break it down into something smaller. They said she was trouble, that she'd come from scandal, that she thought herself better than everyone else. None of it was true, but truth has never been a requirement for cruelty. Elias watched all of this from a distance. He saw how Clara volunteered to help at the general store when supplies ran low, how she read to the children whose parents worked late, how she stood alone at church, back straight, chin high, even when no one sat beside her. He admired her courage in silence, telling himself that admiration was harmless as long as it stayed locked inside him. But admiration has a way of growing teeth. The day everything changed began like any other, hot, dry, and heavy with unspoken tension. A meeting had been called in the square, something about land boundaries and ownership disputes. Elias hadn't planned to attend. He rarely did. Crowds made him feel like he was suffocating. But he saw Clara heading there alone, and something unsettled him. He followed at a distance. As the meeting dragged on, voices grew sharper. Accusations flew, some fair, many not. Then someone mentioned Clara's name, twisting her presence into a problem that needed fixing. Words turned ugly. Someone laughed. Someone else sneered. "What?" And before Elias could stop himself, he realized he was gripping the fence so hard his knuckles had gone white. That was when Clara stepped forward. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply spoke. "Let them watch. I'm not afraid." The courage in those words hit Elias like a blow to the chest, because he knew fear. He had built his entire life around it. And here she was, standing in the open, refusing to let it own her, the crowd murmured, emboldened by her calm. Someone challenged her. Another mocked her. And in that moment, Elias understood something with painful clarity. If he stayed silent now, he would regret it for the rest of his life. His heart hammered as he stepped out from the shadows. People turned, surprised. Elias Cole didn't do this. He didn't speak up. He didn't choose sides. He walked straight to Clara's side and stood there, solid and unmovable, like a post driven deep into the earth. "She's not alone," he said, his voice rough but steady, "and she's not leaving." The square erupted in stunned whispers. No one had expected him, least of all Clara. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something softened in her eyes. Gratitude, yes, but also recognition. As if she saw not just who he was, but who he had been before the world broke him. That moment didn't solve everything. Life is rarely that neat. The town didn't suddenly become kind. But something shifted. Lines were drawn. And Elias, for the first time in years, felt himself stepping back into the shape of a man who mattered. In the days that followed, people talked. Some criticized him. Clara came to his ranch one evening, bringing bread she'd baked herself. They sat on the porch as the sun dipped below the horizon, sharing stories in careful pieces. Elias told her about the fire, about the losses, about how loneliness can feel safer than hope. Clara listened without trying to fix him, and when she spoke of her own past, of walking away from a life that demanded she be smaller, Elias understood her bravery even more. They didn't rush anything. Trust grew slowly, like grass after a hard winter. There were setbacks. Moments when Elias pulled away, convinced he wasn't enough. Days when Clara questioned whether standing her ground had been worth the cost. But each time, they came back to the same truth. Courage doesn't mean you're never afraid. It means you act anyway. The town watched them, just as Clara had said. They would. Some saw a scandal. Others saw a quiet miracle. What mattered was that Elias no longer hid, and Clara no longer stood alone. Months later, at another gathering in the square, the mood was different. The same faces, the same dust, but less hostility. More understanding. Elias stood beside Clara, not as a defender but as a partner. When someone challenged them, they answered together, calm and united. That was the day Elias realized something profound. His move hadn't just changed her life, it had changed his own. By choosing courage once, he had unlocked a future he thought was forever closed. And as they walked home under a sky streaked with stars, Elias felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not loud or reckless. Just steady. Real. Because sometimes, the bravest thing a lonely soul can do is step forward and be seen. And sometimes when you do, you discover you were never as alone as you thought.